It is the Beaver Banter podcast. My name is CJ Baumgartner. Ian Rivers, my co-host. And Ian, we got a special episode of the Beaver Banter podcast today as we're talking with Bemidji Pioneer reporter Jared Rubado. Jared, thanks for joining the podcast. We'll kind of let you officially warm everybody up here today. I guess let's just start out with kind of everything you do at the Bemidji Pioneer right now.
It's kind of a loaded question. So, I started at the Pioneer about almost a year ago. I technically started the beginning of February last year. I moved from Detroit Lakes. I was doing a little back and forth there. It's our newspapers, both newspapers are owned by the same communications company. So it was more of a transfer there. So a little bit of a long story, but I'll try and make it brief. I went to college at Augustana, and I got a job in Alexandria, just covering sports, high school level stuff. Was there for about 3 years. The Detroit Lakes sports editor left, so they were like, "Hey, do you want to move to DL and take over that?" And I was like, "Well, there's a lot of hockey in Alexandria. There's not a lot of hockey in DL, kind of a thing. But you know what? It couldn't hurt to put editor on the resume and moved to DL." Absolutely loved it. It was one of the best decisions I ever made going to DL. About last November-ish, somewhere around there, I'd say. My old boss in Alexandria, he was leaving. So he said, "Hey, you got a little bit of experience. You want to come back and take my job?" And I was like, "Sure, that sounds like a great idea." There's 5 hockey teams there. They have 4 high school teams in Alexandria. With the Christian Academy there, and the Null 3 team, the Alexandria Blizzard. So I get all that hockey, and I get to keep the resume strong. Sounds great. So word got out that I was probably going to leave DL, and Micah Freeze, who is the former sports editor here, swooped in, and when I mean at the last second, he swooped in at the very last second. It was like, "Hey, heard you're thinking about taking this job. Just a heads up, I might leave in a month, so do with that what you will." And I was like, "Oh man, that'd be pretty cool." I don't know what Bemidji's like. I grew up in Brainerd, so I knew what Bemidji was like, but I knew everybody in Alex, so it was just a lot of juggling. Turns out, you get to cover D1 hockey and keep the same position as the sports editor, right? It ended up being a no-brainer. Then I moved here about around this time last year. It was February 25th was my official move-in date. The night before I moved in, I was actually still covering a game. I went out to the REA and the Mini Ralph and Thief. I was there until about 3 o'clock in the morning. I go back to DL, grab all of my stuff, pack it into a car. My parents were moving all the stuff out of my apartment during the day. And then I moved to Bemidji the next day and started working. So wow. It's been fast, but it's been great. And I'm happy to be here, and I've met so many great people. And again, you get to cover D1 hockey. It's a heck of an opportunity.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty big tiebreaker to me. Obviously, I'm pretty biased towards the Bemidji area, having attended school there. But, I think that kind of leads me into a question that might get us a hair off topic. But you mentioned just how big hockey was for you. And then going to Augustana, and now after you're gone, they get a D1 hockey team of their own. That has to be a little bit bittersweet, knowing that, you're happy that they've got it, but you would have liked it, probably to start about 10 years ago, huh?
Yeah, because my freshman dorm is currently a half a football field away from their new rink. Are you kidding me? I would have loved that. But I think in hindsight, I've thought about that 100 times. Man, imagine if I was in college now, how much fun that would be now. But I think looking back, I'd prefer it happen the way that it did, because it exposed me to more sports than I necessarily was comfortable writing about. I like basketball. I can write a little bit about basketball. I still can't tell the difference between a zone defense and a man defense, but I get basketball. I know what a foul is now. So at the time, Augie was a huge basketball school. You know, we won national title. We won the NSIC, I believe, 3 times. I lived with 2 basketball players. Baseball, I lived with, I think, at Augie, 3 or 4 different baseball players. We won a baseball national title. I've always loved baseball, but then I kind of learned how to write about baseball. I worked for the Augie football team. That gave me a little bit of an insight to learn how to write about football. So, and then, because when you go into a prep reporting job, your boss will just send you to anything. Like, hey, have you ever been to gymnastics? Nope. Well, go figure it out. And I did, and I think that kind of teaches you to get a handle on things a little bit better and expose yourself outside of it. You know, I think I eventually would have figured out that hockey was the thing I want to do, you know, as kind of the main focus at some points, but you know, I didn't know how to write about soccer. Now soccer is one of my favorite sports, and I watch soccer every single weekend. I love going to the women's soccer games here. I love going to the high school soccer games here. So yeah, you know, it's a little bitter, but at the same time, like, I wouldn't have traded those the national championship, the 2 of them, I guess, with baseball, the baseball one, the men's basketball one, and all of those friends. I mean, that's pretty special. So
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned that with being a local sports reporter, and you're kind of just sent around doing a bunch of stuff. My first job was in TV. I was a news and sports reporter in Duluth, and that was kind of the same thing. It's like, have you ever heard of this before? Have you ever heard of curling? Well, you're going to go there and you're just going to get, like, you know, at least with TV, you can show them things, and like, you don't have to worry about necessarily explaining things for them.
Mhm.
With writing, you do have to do a little bit of that. So I guess this kind of leads into my next question of, you know, what's the difference? Because sometimes people think, you know, sports reporter, whether you're doing it for radio, for TV, or writing, specifically what you do when you cover an event and you got to write about it and put it in a paper, and it also goes online. But, you know, when you go to a game or an event or whatever sporting thing you have, what goes through your mind of like, okay, I need to do this. Here's how I make sure that I get all the essentials I need to write my story. That's
a really good question, because, you know, I've done this for almost 5 years now, and I honestly don't think anybody's ever asked me that. I guess at this point, everything's just really routine, right? Like, I go to a game and watch it from the perspective of, what do the fans want to know about what's happening? Fans aren't stupid. Fans are honest. Fans are passionate. I'll just use this past weekend as an example with men's hockey in Ferris State. I could go to that game and write, here's who scored this goal, this goal, this goal, this goal, turn it in, and it'd be done, and it'd be fine. But is that more interesting than me trying to find out what was going through Reese Chittington's head as bears were being thrown at him on the ice as he skates to the handshake line? Because I want to know. I've played hockey. I want to know what it's like to be on the ice at that time. So I'm going to ask him about it. And then I can use that little piece of information and then feed it into the rest of the story. Yeah, he scored, but how did he feel about how he scored? Essentially, you just become a storyteller in the sense of, you're telling it through the lens of the players and the coaches and how they felt. That doesn't necessarily mean that you dress it up in a way where, oh, it's always positive. It's always, you know, Bemidji State, pro Bemidji High School, all of these things. That's not how it is. Because if, you know, the boys hockey team here plays a bad game, the fans want to know what went wrong. So I'm going to tell them what went wrong, not just tell them what happened. Whereas, you know, in my experience with people who've worked in TV, you only get 30 seconds to talk about what happened here. And it's more of just, here's all the information. We're going to get it to you as fast as we can. And you're going to deal with that, do with it what you will, right? Whereas our medium is more, okay, here's how everything happened. Here's how it played out. Here's not necessarily what showed up in a box score, but what led to the things that ended up becoming in the box score. So, it's a little bit of a process, right? Like, you know, when I first started, my hockey stories were 800 words and my basketball stories were 400 words, because I couldn't come up with why things were happening. But you sometimes just learn, okay, this is why they went on a run. This is why they called the timeout. You know, this is how important that charge was called in the second half and how it flipped the course of that game. You know, football, right? A pass breakup. in deep in coverage. Maybe that receiver catches the ball and that changes the whole landscape of the game, but they didn't. So how did that one play impact the next play and the play after that? So you find changes in momentum and switches in the game, things that people might not necessarily see, but you see it. Or maybe you didn't catch something, but somebody else did. And so you get it from their perspective. It's all just about absorbing as much information as you can and just sifting it out into hopefully a concise story, which is something I struggle with sometimes. I write a little bit too much every now and then, but and just feeding it to the people that pay for what you're doing. It's the same thing for radio. People go on the radio to hear exactly what's happening in the game. People go to Lakeland on TV because they want to see how it happened. People read what newspapers write because they want to know how it happened. Each different medium of media serves a different purpose. And once you hone in on that side of your job, the rest, like I said, it becomes routine.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the fact that it's kind of a learning curve sometimes when you have to absorb all these new sports. And that's something that I think we are able to do here well, is bounce off of each other. And it's a shame that the spring sports aren't in a little bit better spot here at BSU, because that's kind of what CJ's expertise is. And for a while, I think, CJ, you got a lot more exposure to it, especially when you got to BSU and you had to work a lot of basketball games. But for a while when we were doing radio, it was like, man, Ian played basketball and he knows more of the X's and O's of that sport. And we lean on each other for football. So we have a pretty good relationship in that aspect where, I do a lot of and hockey's one for me that I'm still kind of learning the X's and O's. Like, wow, yeah, that goal looked pretty ugly. Who was in the wrong on that play? Why was Loft out of position? Why was, Setasari out of position? Where was he supposed to be? That stuff kind of slips my mind sometimes when I'm watching the game. So it's good to have extra perspectives, like you said, to help balance out your own ideas.
That's a great point, because the thing with hockey, and it's one of the things that I see the most in terms of whether it's feedback, the people that'll tweet at me, the people that I just see on Twitter, Facebook, wherever it might be, they'll look at a score. And like the perfect example of this is the Wild game that happened at 1:00 today, where you look at a score and say, wow, 10-8. Those goalies must have been awful that game. Well, I mean, they kind of were, but then you look at each one of those 18 goals and was like, well, okay, the goalie physically couldn't see the puck on that one because his own guy's butt was sticking in his face. The other one, the weak side defenseman left him open on the back door. Okay, well, that's not on the goalie either. And so once hockey fans start getting in the habit of understanding, okay, not every goal is the goalie's fault. Not every goal is the goal scorer's, reward. And they look at it as more of a holistic team thing. It turns into, I guess it just changes your perspective on it. But I actually want to go back to something that that CJ said, and then Ian also said. When CJ, you said, you started and they say, okay, go figure it out. Go into radio, go call this game, figure it out. I personally believe that's like the best way to start.
Right.
100%. When I started in Alexandria, I technically hadn't graduated from college yet. And this is a little bit of a longer story, but it's a little bit of a funny one too. So I'll try and make it brief. I could not pass accounting to save my life. I stayed an extra semester. I failed accounting the first 2 times. The school ended up putting me in like a remedial math class that would have counted for accounting. It was not accounting, but it was what I needed to to pick up my second major in sports management. I had the job in Alexandria. Sioux Falls was about 4 hours away. My official start date was something like December 10th. My soon-to-be boss called me. He's like, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Do you want to come up to Alexandria and cover a Brandon Evansville basketball game? Sure. Why not? Like, that sounds fine. Like, I'll drive up there and cover a game. Am I getting paid for it? Yeah, sure. Like, let's go. So I drove up, covered a game, stayed in a hotel, ended up covering a Blizzard game the next night. I had never held an actual camera before, like a sports photography camera, but you at Alexandria, you shoot your own photos. So I was like, okay, well, I'll try it. I'll pick up the camera and I'll shoot it and I'll do it for hockey. Like, screw it. Well, why not? And like, it almost didn't give me enough time to think about how much I could screw it up. Whereas like, if, they're just like, well, go figure it out. It doesn't matter if you're wrong. You're just doing this extra anyway. And so it went well. I ended up going to school like the next week. We took our accounting final. I did not pass the accounting final. I was set to fail accounting for a third time. I emailed the professor after and was like, hey, I already have a job. Is there any way you could just like throw me a bone and give me a C? And because you needed a C to pass the major course. And she emailed me back in about 30 seconds. Like, it was a good thing you emailed me, because if not, you were probably going to have to retake this class. So she gave me my C. I've never been back to school, and I don't think I ever will, because school is not for me. So
we've all been through some of those situations. I remember for us at Bemidji State, it was I can't remember if it was sport finance. Ian, is that the one? That was like the really hard one. That one, I have no idea how I got through. In some of those, I'm like, I'm a communications major. I'm not going in here to do math. I can't figure any of this out. So I'm in the same boat with you. I don't know how I got through my stuff there. But, you mentioned that you get to do in that job in Alexandria, you mentioned all the different, there's Alexandria High School, and that's one of the bigger, greater Minnesota high schools, and they have all that stuff. But then you also kind of throw in, you're covering Brandon Evansville Charger games. You're covering, Osakis if you can. You're like bouncing around, doing all these small towns. And how fun was that for you to get to kind of dive in? And, because you're from Brainerd, so you like, the Bemidji's and the Alexandrias, and you were in Sioux Falls, which is the biggest city in South Dakota. For you to go and to kind of bounce around through these small towns, how fun was that to get to pick that up? Because Class A basketball, we play Brandon Evansville every year when I was at Bertha Hewitt. So that's my connection here.
Yeah, no, it was really cool. In Alexandria, we covered 7 different schools, and I think I can go through them and list them all. Alexandria, Brandon Evansville, Osakis, West Central Area, Minnewaska, Ashby, Parker's Prairie. That we covered all of them. Every single box score that came in, they all got written up. They all made it into the paper. It was every single sport. And you get thrown around to all of those different area schools. And basketball was really cool, because Section 6 for 6A for basketball is as cutthroat as it gets in Minnesota. It is as deep of a section as you will find. You 8 seeds will win that section, and nobody will be surprised, because they're ranked like 17th in the state. But the sport that really opened my eyes to the small town Minnesota sports culture was wrestling. Oh my gosh. When it's still one of the craziest sporting events I've ever been to. I literally am getting like chills thinking about it right now. There was, I don't remember what year it was, but West Central Area, Ashby, Brandon Evansville versus Bertha Hewitt, Verndale, Parker's Prairie Wrestling at West Central Area High School. Those are only 2 programs, by the way. That's like 18 different schools combined into 2 programs. And I remember we got like a phone call from the West Central AD at the time, and he called my phone. He didn't call my boss's phone, which I thought was weird. My phone was like a ghost town there, because they always call my boss. And he's like, hey, I don't know if you can put something in the paper or not, but you got to tell people that we don't have any more tickets left for this wrestling meet coming up on Thursday. My boss and I just kind of looked at each other like, what the heck? It's wrestling. Like, there's no tickets left. It's high school wrestling. It was shoulder to shoulder, jammed in. West Central Area is not like a small school. It's a pretty decent sized high school. The gym is a really nice. There's probably 20 rows of bleachers in that gym. It's not as big as like Bemidji High School or Brainerd or Alex, but it's like a step down from that. And that thing was packed. When you shoot your own photos too in wrestling, you sit on the edge of the mat, and the mat would shake because the whole building was vibrating from how loud these people were. And it was one of the most unforgettable things. And when you're in that atmosphere, you just gain a level of appreciation for these small towns and how passionate they are about sports. It's the same thing when I came here. I went to a Cass Lake Bena basketball game last year against, I think it was against Black Duck. It was a normal game. Cass Lake Bena blew them out by 20 points, but you watch the game and you see how many people are there. Like the town of Cass Lake like shut down for that game. It was just a regular season game. You know, I'll go to the Cass Lake Bena Fertile Beltrami game next week, and that's a top 15 matchup in Class A this year. You know, how packed is that gym going to be? You know, so it's at the end of the day, you know, you could go in it with the attitude of, well, I'm not at the biggest game tonight. I'm not at the most well-attended game tonight, and, you know, do with it what you will. But at the end of the day, I'm getting paid to cover sports. This job doesn't feel real half the time. Sports have been my life since I was, you know, for as long as I can remember. And I get real money to go to these games and write about them. I love writing. It never feels like I'm working, and it's competition. And when you love the aspects of competition like I do, it's so easy to do it.
Yeah, and you know, to speak on your wrestling thing, by the way, I just wrote up for the radio station I work at in my full-time job. Berthieu of Verndale Parker's Prairie went to state. Staples Motley's going to state, and United North Central, which is Monaga and Speaker, going to state. So all three schools we are going to have to cover now at the state team wrestling tournament. So that's what it's like for them. But I mean, we'll now swing up to Bemidji now that we've kind of beat around the bush here a little bit, but it's been great kind of getting to see your perspective, and it helps to ask you these questions, Sharon, and get to know who you are. And for the people who read your stuff and get to kind of understand where you're coming from on this, because now you get to Bemidji. And like we said, you've been here, you know, about a year roughly. Mm-hmm. And what's that experience like kind of when you got first started interacting, because we're a Bemidji State podcast? What's it like when you got on campus to BSU to check out some of these sporting events? What's that process been like for you over the last year?
This is perfect, because I'd like to give each of you guys a guess of the first Bemidji State sport I covered.
It's gotta be something just out of left field.
For whatever reason, I want to say club rugby.
It was not club rugby. It's an official sport.
Tennis.
Okay.
You're going to tennis?
Yeah,
tennis is right. Tennis is
let's go.
Was the first sport I ever covered at Bemidji State.
That's awesome.
I now, granted, the Bemidji State women's tennis coach is also the high school coach. I've known him since I was in Alexandria, so it was, you know, not as daunting as meeting a collegiate head coach maybe seems when, you know, compare him to Tom Serratori. It's a little bit more nerve-wracking, but yeah, I mean, it was definitely a challenge, right? Because high school sports work so much differently than college sports. The physical writing of the story is almost the same, but the interactions with coaches are far different, where, you know, if there was a problem or I needed a box score or a score book or something for high school sports, I could text a coach in 2 seconds and he'd get it back to me, and that was it. Where for here, everything is online. So you're a little bit more disconnected from the coaches and the players. To do interviews, you usually go through the SIDs and they get you the stuff you need and they set you up, and you have to build the relationships that way. I actually wrote about this about a month ago, but when you move in sports media, you know, granted, you're moving to a better opportunity, but it's really challenging because your job is your relationships and the relationships you make with people. And to start over from scratch is really tough. You know, you have to go back to square one and get to know these coaches. How does this coach work from this coach? You know, how does this player like to be interviewed from this player? Which players are good quotes? Which players do you know they get a little bit more nervous for quotes? You know, stuff like that. It's which players can you mess around with? You know, poke fun at them a little bit in interviews. You know, it's just a different kind of learning curve. And so to start from scratch, whether you're going from one high school town to another high school town or into more of a college atmosphere like Bemidji, you know, you always go back to square one. So it's a lot of just trusting yourself to, you know, do the same things that you did to get the opportunity. But yeah, I mean, it's different meeting different coaches every single time, and you learn their quirks and, you know, what kind of questions they answer, what kind of questions they more brush off. And then you just find the groove within each coach. And that's just how the basis of establishing those relationships.
Has there been a particular sport or even a particular set of coaches or athletes that you've connected with the best, like that you like covering the most so far around Bemidji State?
It's weird because I haven't been around long enough to like. I've only interviewed like Brent Bolte one time. That's Christian does all of our football stuff. He's much more of a football guy than I am. I like watching college football. I like watching the Vikings, but I can count on one hand how many Sunday night football games I watched this year. There's hockey on, so I'm going to watch hockey. I haven't interviewed the softball coach or the track coach, or I haven't interviewed either basketball coaches yet, but I've interviewed Jim Stone probably 30 times by now, Sarah Torrey twice a week, Scanlon twice a week. So, it's not so much that like I have better relationships with one or the other. It's just not how like I think about it. It's more like, okay, Tom's going to be in this kind of a mood after this kind of a game. So these are the kind of questions I'm going to get the answers that I need for my story. Same with Stone, same with Scanlon, right? You just go down the list and that's how you do it. Chubbs with the baseball team, right? It's they're going to have a tough season for baseball. But if I just go ask him like, hey, why'd you give up 15 runs this game? He's going, well, our pitchers didn't throw strikes. What kind of answer does that give me? You can look at a box score and say, their pitchers didn't throw enough strikes, so you find things that he's more willing to talk about that kind of opens up the floor a little bit. And then you end up getting the things you need to do a good job.
Yeah. And, you kind of mentioned that too, the way of like having to talk to some of these coaches, and you got to ask them, everybody likes to poke fun at reporters' questions sometimes if they see them on social media. And sometimes you just have to ask a question, because even if you know the response you're going to get, you sometimes just need to say, well, I had to ask him that question, or, you just kind of have to sometimes get the ball rolling. It's all about working it up. So I thought that's a good answer that you had, Jared, on kind of talking about those guys. And, I think obviously, hockey is your bread and butter. Hockey is the thing that you love covering the most. And, getting to cover Division I hockey for yourself, it's kind of the first full season this year. Things were weird when you got here a year ago. The women's hockey team was going through a rebuilding year, and the men's hockey team was in the middle of a free fall because everybody was hurt and things were falling apart. And, for this year, what's it been like covering Bemidji State men's and women's hockey?
Unbelievable. I love literally every single second of it. I mean, growing up in Brainerd, my dad grew up in Grand Rapids, big hockey town. He and his brothers all played hockey. You go at the I don't know if it's called the Grand Rapids Civic Center or not, but whatever that rink's called, it's one of the best rinks in Minnesota. You go, you see the state tournament participant team pictures. You see my uncles on the wall in there. Hockey's been a part of my family since literally as long as I can remember. I grew up in Brainerd. We went to St. Cloud State games. We went to Gopher games. We went to Bemidji State games. Plug your ears, Beaver fans. We went to UND games. Half my family went to UND. I grew up just loving the sport. And when you are so close to it, even to go even a step further, I grew up playing goalie in Brainerd, and the goalie that was 6 years older than me or whatever, he ended up playing at Bemidji State. Well, when you're a goalie in high school, you pay it forward and you go to the youth practices and you help out the youth goalies. And it's just this thing that happens in these hockey towns where it's just a long line of tradition. Well, I tune into Bemidji State games because he was on the bench for those games. And, you come close to it. My best friend from college from high school played college hockey. Another kid I played with played for North Dakota. So to be around it, to be that close to it, and not necessarily think, well, man, it'd be really cool to get there at some point, but just to have so much familiarity with it, and then to earn an opportunity where now this is your responsibility to go to these games, watch them, report on them, and do the thing you love to do in that atmosphere that you've been that close with. It's been unbelievable. And to be able to sit in a press room and talk to Scanlon and Sarah Torrey, the things that Saratori is one of the more infamous names in college hockey. It's a national name, and to get access to him twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever it is, to have his number in my phone and just call him like, hey, I need an answer on this thing, and he'll give me an answer, stuff like that. It's a lot of pinch me moments, like sitting in the Ralph Engelstad Arena next to Brad Schlossman, when he's, I don't think I've said this to many people, but when I first started, we were in the summer, it's a little bit quieter in the summer. Brad Schlossman, he works for the Grand Forks Herald. Well, that's also owned by our communications company. So I sent him an email and I said, hey, how do you cover college hockey? This is my first year doing it and I want to get to know it better. He called me within 2 hours and he was on the phone with me for almost 3 hours, just letting me pick his brain as to what he's doing. This is a guy that you go on Twitter, he's got 20,000 Twitter followers, and those fans are almost waiting in bated breath of what he's going to tweet next. And this guy is willingly helping me to get better at my job. Like, when you put it in that kind of perspective, it's unbelievable the amount of resources I've been just gifted. And I sit here and I just want to make the most of them. And, and for the first year here too, I mean, getting Kyle Loft as a captain, could you imagine a better captain to talk to your first year covering college hockey? I mean, I think back to something Saratori said about 3 months ago when it was right before Christmas. He said it got brought up, the Bemidji high school boys hockey coach. He was a Bemidji State captain, Ben Kinney, and someone asked him a question about Ben Kinney for a story they were working on, and they were like, and Saratori said, Ben Kinney is one of 5 or 6 people that have come through this program, and I was like, you need to be a coach because they have all the coaching qualities. And Kyle Loft is one of the guys that he mentioned. Travis Winter, the associate head coach, was another one. So to have Kyle Loft as a captain, Eric Polkamp, gold medalist, Team USA winning kid, that is a once in a lifetime recruit that Bemidji State got. He's in my first year here. It's incredibly lucky is how I feel most of the time. And just really thankful that Micah decided to hang him up when he did.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's kind of a great year for that. I mean, it's been up and down in terms of the play on the ice, and now I think we're in a good spot. But just what has it been like from not a fan perspective necessarily, but just like covering the CCHA as a whole as the Beavers try to navigate their way through these rough waters? What has that kind of been like on a week-to-week basis?
I like to think of the CCHA as like traditional Pac-12 football, where the conference is just constantly devouring itself. That's how it feels weekend to weekend. It doesn't matter what you did the night before. It doesn't matter what's coming up next weekend or what you did even the weekend before, because every time these teams step on the ice, it's a coin toss. That's legitimately what it feels like every single night. And there's a lot that goes into it. I'm not doing it enough justice by saying it's just a coin toss, but it's to see the growth from even in losses, you can still see the growth. And it's really cool to be able to follow a team and watch every single game. That's not something I've ever done before. When you're a prep sports reporter, you don't get to watch every game. Before COVID, half the schools didn't even stream games on YouTube. So the best you could do, and I mean the very best you could do, was football, because there's only 8 of them a year plus playoffs in high school, and then you can kind of see that growth before. But for hockey, I've never covered 30 some games in a year and watched every single one of them. Even if I'm covering a women's game and there's a men's game going on at the same time, I go back and watch the men's game because there's some ththings that, again, don't show up in a box score, and you can pick at them and then use them, or sometimes most of the time not use them, and it is what it is. So yeah, I mean, it's like you said, Ian, there are ups and downs. Like every single team has ups and downs. North Dakota lost this week. They got the piss beat out of them by Colorado College, and It was ugly, and I'm sure the sky was falling amongst the UND faithful, but that's just, those are just fans, and that's how fans are, and that's how they should be, because that's what sports are knee-jerk reactions and all of the fun stuff that comes with it. But for me, the best part of it is getting to know the players and the coaches, and getting them comfortable with you, and building those relationships, and then seeing their successes and failures play out is rewarding. Even the failures, it's rewarding, because that at some point they're going to grow from those moments. And that's not a college sports thing. That's just a sports thing. That's a high school sports thing. That's a youth sports thing. And I'm sure it's even a pro sports thing. So that whole perspective of it's really rewarding.
Yeah.
I love your comment about weekend to weekend. It really doesn't matter what happens. And sometimes it feels like night to night. Like I remember back to early December, that series at home against Lake Superior State, you win 7-1 on Friday night, and you're like, all right, cool. This is an easy little 6-point weekend. And then you come out and lose 6-1 the next night. It's like, what just happened here? And it's kind of been like that all season. Obviously, that's the extreme example, but yeah, and it's like you said, it's all across college hockey this year. There's not necessarily one team that's stood out and been the absolute dominating force. North Dakota, like you said, my sister goes to North Dakota. She was home this weekend, and she came up to me and she's like, yeah, actually, we're down, because I was watching the Beaver game on my phone. And she's like, how are you guys doing? I'm like, oh, we're up, we're up 4-1. It's the third period. She's like, yeah, we're losing 5-1 in the third period. I'm like, oh, nice.
It's kind of, it's interesting you bring that up, because I think like there's the weekend to weekend thing, like in this conference, right? In the CCHA, it doesn't, like the previous weekend just doesn't matter. Like you can throw it out literally every single time. But when you look at the results as a whole, right, and you start parsing through them, you can start to find the consistencies even in an inconsistent season. Bemidji State is there. There's two of them that stick out. They are horrible at special teams. Their penalty kill is brutal. Their power play, it's getting better, but it's still not great. They can't win faceoffs. They're one of the worst faceoff teams in the country. They lost like 70% of their faceoffs on Saturday night against Ferris State. And while those things are really bad, and they've been bad all year, you can also start to point at, okay, here's where they're really good. They don't take penalties. So maybe their penalty kill isn't as big of a problem, because they are one of the best, the most disciplined teams in the country. Their goaltending right now has been elite. I mean, Matthias Scholl has been very, very good since he came back. And that's been consistent, even in the losses to Ferris State, or the blown leads in the third period, the points left on the table, and to kind of piggyback off that point you made about Lake State, I think for fans, it's so easy to just look at, okay, we lost a point in overtime against Lake State. We lost one in, going to overtime against Ferris in Northern Michigan. We're leaving points on the table. We can't leave points on the table in this tight race. And while that's true, that's 100% true. You also have to take into account they stole points from Minnesota State and Michigan Tech. That Michigan Tech comeback win, I think you could point to that as being something that derailed their season, because they were coming off of a good weekend. I believe it was against Augustana, and I think they swept. And then the next week, and they start Friday night, they shut out Bemidji State in their barn on Friday night. Saturday's house money, and they had a 3-goal lead late in the second period. They lost that game in regulation. That's a 6-point swing for Northern Michigan, Michigan Tech. What would Michigan Tech do to have that 6-point swing right now? Minnesota State's a good one. What would they do? How much would they appreciate Bemidji State being at 34 points and then being bumped up 3 more? Those were, while the Beavers have left points on the table, and you should not leave points on the table at this point in the season, and there's not really an excuse for it. There's also not really an excuse for those dramatic comeback victories that we've seen this year either. And so I think it's just putting everything into, again, a perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, this year has been the least egregious example, because like you said, they have examples where they've stolen those points back. You you lose points against Northern Michigan and Ferris State because you give up a goal halfway through the third period. But like last year, it was not just halfway through the third period, it was within the last 2 minutes of games. On 9 occasions last year, they dropped points. And it's like they only did it once to somebody else where that was the case.
Mhm.
So last year it was like, wow, we left a lot of points on the table. Yeah, this year I think it's been pretty 50-50. For every point that they've quote unquote dropped, they've gotten it back somewhere else along the line. So, it does stink a little bit because I think they played a lot better than 5 points will tell you against Northern Michigan, especially. I think that Thursday game against Ferris State was a little bit sloppier than you'd like, but again, 5 points, you've taken 10 points now from your last 2 weekends. That's got to be the best stretch of games that the Beavers have had over 2 weekends this year, and it's coming at the right time. So I can't complain.
100%. And to go back to last year when you talk about how they dropped points in 9 straight games like that. That's a consistency, and that's a consistent problem for a team that had an inconsistent year. And when the consistencies in a team will tell you more about them than just the wins and the losses, because you look at teams and this, I think this is more applicable to something like baseball, where like you could play 8 standout innings, have 1 bad 9th inning, and well, then you pick up a loss when you shouldn't have picked up a loss. Whereas, I think a lot more feels like it has to happen in other sports like football and basketball, and it's more of a collective breakdown. But in hockey too, like, the consistencies and the inconsistencies are the differentiator of whether or not a team is, or, I guess just the makeup of a team. And I think too, the Bemidji State is really unique in the sense that their non-conference schedule is so tough. It is brutal. And yeah, it stings for fans when they lose an overtime game to North Dakota. They drop 2 6-1 games. They drop an overtime game against Duluth. Those aren't fun and they sting. But in a season like this, like, those losses don't matter. They don't. Maybe they could have if they had won all of those games, but asking a team like Bemidji State to win all of those games against North Dakota, Duluth, and St. Cloud State, it's just not realistic. And I think people could hear something like that and think, wow, that's not really competitive. My least favorite phrase in sports is you can't win them all, because guess what? You literally can win them all. Like, even it's not likely, but like, it's statistically not impossible for the Twins to go 162-0 this year. And I'm still going to get upset when the Twins don't win, but they can go out and win every single game. It's not impossible. So it's not like when you hear something like, well, those games don't necessarily matter. They just don't matter this year because of where they are in the pairwise. And so you have to almost look at those in its own separate category of what's happening. Against CCHA teams, the Bemidji State has been the best team in the league this year. That's why they're in first place, and they swept St. Thomas. How many teams have swept St. Thomas this year? And in regulation, picked up 6 points against St. Thomas. That's a good hockey team. How many teams could go into Mankato and erase a 2-goal deficit with 6 minutes left? I mean, that hasn't happened this year, except for one time, and it was Bemidji State. So separating just the black and white wins and losses from the collective of what this team is doing and what they're striving for is, I always think it's important. But again, it doesn't, where those losses against St. Cloud State, Duluth, and North Dakota come into play is the players don't necessarily think like, well, these games don't matter. They want to win those games. Those are the games that have the most fans at them. Those are the games that they're playing against a lot of kids that they know, kids they grew up with playing in Minnesota. Those are the games that when you commit to Bemidji State, you think about playing in a full Sanford Center or a full Ralph or a full Amsoil just against those teams. When you commit to Bemidji State, you're not thinking about the night you get to go to Taffy Abel Arena in Sault Ste. Marie. Nobody's looking forward to that bus ride to the Upper Peninsula. You're thinking about the moments against the in-state teams, even though they count less for the thing they're trying to strive for. Because there also is going to be a time where maybe they pick up a couple of those wins earlier in the season and they're actually in a position to snag a pairwise spot. Maybe the conference as a whole will take a step forward, and those stretches where you win 5 out of 6 games will actually impact your pairwise ranking. But that's just sports. You could go down the list of every single Bemidji State team and divulge it from there.
Yeah.
I
want to let CJ get some words in here, but since we're on
sorry.
the topic of it, I have to bring up, like you said, even if you flip those 3 out of conference games that we lost in overtime, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Duluth, and North Dakota, even if you flip those to overtime wins, because of how bad the rest of the conference has been this year, those wins aren't helping you in pairwise anyways. You might feel a little better about your season, and maybe we'd be 30th instead of 39th in pairwise. I doubt it would even bring us up that much to flip an overtime result.
No.
But the conference as a whole has been too bad that, you drop a game to Ferris State, who's 63rd in pairwise, it's going to take you too far to get back up. So like you said, yeah, it sucks because you don't want to go and lose 2 games to St. Cloud State, an in-state rival, 6-1. The way that looks optically is very bad, and it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But we've been saying it too. Yeah, let's hope for a win, but this does not crush our ultimate goal for the season.
And one more thing before you get to go, CJ. But like the other thing too is, like, let's say the Beavers go win the CCHA tournament. They win the Mason Cup, they get the auto bid, or even take second because St. Thomas wins. Whatever. Let's just say they go into the tournament. I don't think the players on the team are going to think about their games against North Dakota or Duluth or St. Cloud or Wisconsin and think, well, we couldn't beat them back then, so why do you think we can beat them now? Like, that's just not how players think. They'll point to that Wisconsin series and say, well, Kyle Loaf blocked a shot on his wrist and had to get wrist surgery against North Dakota. Gavin Enright started both those games. We didn't even have our starting goalie against the Ferris State games, and like the one where they lost in Ferris State. No Polkamp, no Magnuson, no Loof, no Liam Engstrom. I mean, I don't think like those losses will carry over in that tournament format. And I think like Bemidji State or Minnesota State, or even like a Bowling Green right now, where they're absolutely surging. And if they surge all the way into the NCAA tournament, do you think they're going to care about the loss they had at home to Ohio State in January? No. They're going to be thinking, we are the hottest team in college hockey. We can beat anybody. We're ready to go prove it. And that's just how athletes operate.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And it kind of leads into my next question here. And this will be the last question I got for you today, Jared, is, we talk about it. This team is building and they have a chance to get to the NCAA tournament. They have a chance to win the McNaughton Cup. They have a chance to be a 1 seed going in to the CCHA tournament. Do you feel that buzz in Bemidji? Do you feel like the Sanford Center? Do you feel like people are kind of picking up on that, especially now that they've gotten healthy and they're starting, like we've kind of talked about on the podcast, like things are starting to string together for them? Do you feel that momentum building in Bemidji right now?
A little bit. I think it'll ramp up this week. This is the week that it ramps up. January was so weird. They didn't play a home game in January. They had 2 bye weekends. They go from St. Cloud State. They had 3 straight home games that non-conference, and they were just watching all of these things that happened around them in the league during a month where they didn't play a home league game, and they only played 4 league games in the month of January. Now that they're out of that kind of doldrum part of the season, I think people are really starting to kind of understand, like, oh, wow, okay, they've turned a corner, or at least we think they've turned a corner. Who's up next? Okay, we got Ferris State this weekend. Oh, it's the Teddy Bear Toss? I'm going to go to the Teddy Bear Toss game. I'm going to go watch the Beavs. I'm going to go pay my $5 at the door and get in. Oh, I'm looking at CHN and looking at the scores. Wow, Bowling Green beat St. Thomas. Who do the Bees got next weekend? St. Thomas. We don't lose to St. Thomas. That's what I picture fans thinking right now. And that's, and I don't know if this was by design or how it happened like this, but ending the season at home against Minnesota State, ending the regular season, that is like a dream scenario from like a reporter's perspective, because the most fans will be in that building for a CCHA game this season. And at the most should be on the line. Now they could get swept this weekend and the McNaughton Cup won't be in the building, and then this all be for naught, which again, if we go back to what we were saying about 20 minutes ago, that's very much on the table because it's a CCHA. And so every time you make a prediction or you have a feeling of something's going to happen, you can almost just throw it out because the opposite thing's going to happen. But I think in a community like Bemidji, where it is a small town community and the access to the players and through the media or even outside of the media, whether it's on social media or you see them at a grocery store, or, wherever it is. And, I think fans are starting to pick up on how it is. And I think with the players having as much confidence as they have right now, that's going to resonate here in these last 2 weeks. Now, like I said, if they go down to Mendota Heights and get swept this weekend, whatever. I mean, it's, buckle in for the CCHA tournament and hopefully they can figure it out in the last weekend and maybe play a spoiler to Minnesota State, because I know everyone likes to play spoiler to Minnesota State. But I do think, that buzz that you talk about will reach an apex depending on what happens this weekend.
Yeah, and I think for that series against Minnesota State to mean the most, you have to at least get a split so that you're still – I mean, the good thing is the Beavers will still technically be alive entering March 1st, no matter what happens this weekend, but they will need a lot of help if they get swept by St. Thomas. And it depends on what Bowling Green and what Minnesota State do. But this kind of sets up exactly like it did in 2020 before the season got canceled due to COVID. Minnesota State, Bemidji State, I believe Bemidji State was down by 2 points in what would have been then the WCHA standings to Minnesota State entering that final weekend of the season. I went up for those games. They won on Friday night, leapfrogged Minnesota State, and then Minnesota State beat them on Saturday night, jumping back over Bemidji to win the McNaughton Cup on the last day of the season. So I'm hoping, and I've been hoping for a while now, for like the last month especially, that's kind of what's going to be in effect again, because I think that would be an absolutely insane atmosphere to be able to be at.
Yeah, and like there have been really, really good crowds at the Sanford. There's been some not good crowds. The Thursday, Friday experiment, we'll just call it an experiment.
Hang the banner.
Hang the banner. It definitely happened. But you look at the crowd they had for the icebreaker. It was a really, really good crowd. You look at the Duluth crowd, the St. Cloud State. I don't remember how many people were at the St. Cloud State game, but I know it was almost sold out. Augustana, for some reason, brought in 2,500 a night, which that was a little surprising. There was a good crowd on Saturday. They've done it without getting the marquee draw in the CCHA to come to here yet, and that's Minnesota State. Those fans are going to travel for that, especially if they play for something, and it's just going to be really exciting. From my perspective, I'm just so excited to see how these last 2 weekends play out, and it'd be cool to cover a McNaughton Cup win and do the whole 1 seed thing and not have to travel for the playoffs. But whatever happens. I'm just really excited to see how it plays out, and it couldn't come at a better time where Bemidji State is getting healthy. They are playing their best hockey right now, but again, we'll see what happens this weekend, because that might be a moot point.
Yeah, and I think this is a good point to kind of end on. I think the Bemidji State hockey is in a fun spot right now. It's been really fun to get to cover this and to get to talk about it this season. It's been fun to get to talk to you today, Jared. We got a timer on here for our podcast. We can't go over an hour because we're doing a recording. So to give you a few minutes, we'll let you leave on this. What has been your favorite? I know you've had a lot of stories that you put out that you say that's been really fun to write about. What's been your favorite story to write about this season and why? And we'll let you end on that.
Okay. I have to say it's the Eric Polkamp story. And I'll give a little bit of backstory too. I see the recording thing in the corner, so I'll keep it short. My best friend in high school is Eric Polkamp's brother, Chris Polkamp. We graduated high school together, same class. I'm a groomsman in his wedding. I've worked for his dad in high school. I came to Bemidji when he played for Bowling Green, and we'd go to the home games because they'd somehow always line up during Augustana's spring break or a Christmas break. So knowing Eric for as long as I have and getting to see the progression of his hockey career get to a point where he wins a gold medal and getting to write that story about their whole family and their whole family taking that trip. It's the most, it was tough to write just because you have to separate yourself from the relationship that you have with them, but you can also use parts of that relationship that maybe other people don't, they wouldn't know about him. But Eric Polkamp is truly one of the better recruits that Bemidji State as a whole school for all sports has ever gotten and maybe ever will get, just with and how it happened, where he had 2 points by the time he committed, to him leading to getting a USHL Defenseman of the Year. That's unbelievable. And getting a chance to tell the story about him and his family and how he got here was really special. That was, and then the other one I would say is the Chloe Kirkpatrick story about sled hockey. The most impressive athlete I've met in my entire life. Chloe Kirkpatrick was adopted at 7 years old from China. She has 2 club feet and spina bifida. She's never been able to walk. She's lived her entire life in a wheelchair. Actually, no, because her orphanage didn't have a wheelchair for her. So they basically just propped her up in the corner of this orphanage in China. And then she somehow got adopted by a woman who lived in Bemidji, and she brings her back here. And now she's a sled hockey gold medalist from China. Like, it's how does that happen? Like, how in the world does something like that happen? It's so many little things had to play out for it to happen exactly like that, but it did, and I got to write about it and meet them, and so it's really special, and yeah, those 2 are going to stick out for me for a very, very long time.
Jared Rubado, reporter, sports editor at the Bemidji Pioneer, joining us on the Beaver Banter podcast. And Jared, where can they find your work? Where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. It's out there. You'll see it. BemidjiPioneer.com. We have a nice hockey page up there. I tweet a lot of dumb stuff during games. I like to have fun on Twitter. It is what it is. I tweeted that stupid video of Polkamp with the Happy Gilmore swing on Saturday. One quick thing. I did live stats for BSU on Saturday because they're a little shorthanded right now. I don't know how I caught that brief clip of Eric Polkamp taking a golf swing at a teddy bear, but the first thing I thought of was, oh, that's Happy Gilmore. So I spent way too long trying to figure out how to stitch videos together yesterday. And, so I do a lot of dumb stuff on Twitter, but it's fine, and it's a lot of fun.
Jared Rubado, again, sports editor at the Bemidji Pioneer. Check out all of his work there. And we appreciate the time, Jared. We hope that we can talk with you again, maybe towards the end of the hockey season, or, granted, if they end up getting to a tournament or something like that, we'd love to have you on, and you're welcome back on the podcast anytime. Anytime
you ask, I'll hop on. I think you guys do an awesome job. I love fan perspective media. I think it's really important to have fan perspective media. I look at Tech Hockey Guide and the thing that they've built. That's really cool. And I like that other colleges, other communities, no matter how big the town, also does that. And so I think it's important because it provides a different perspective. I can't give that perspective, whereas you guys can. And so that's something that's been fun to watch you guys grow. And I hope you guys keep growing. So anytime I'll hop back on.
Awesome. This has been the Beaver Banter podcast. We'll check you guys next time.